This car has no brakes. And the reason why I know that is because when I test drove the car, the brake pedal basically went to the floor and I could feel like I was squeezing brake fluid out of the system. The mechanic who looked at the vehicle prior to me did identify this issue, so I kind of knew to expect it. But where it was leaking from, how much it was leaking, was anyone's guess. So when I got the car back into my driveway, I started to investigate and started the process of fixing the leaky brake lines. There's a twist, I won't spoil it, but it definitely caused a little bit of frustration when I thought that I was done, so enjoy. I did put a piece of cardboard under the vehicle, and I see it's leaking just inside the passenger side rear wheel there. I'm now going to jack up the rear end of the car in the center at the rear here. Hopefully lift the entire rear end up evenly on both sides and put one jack stand on either side along the frame rail so I can hold up both sides. But before I do that, I'm going to break loose the lug nuts on the wheel so I can make sure I can easily get the wheel off once it's in the air. Alright, so two jack stands, one on either side, and the jack is also supporting in the middle at the rear. So that should be enough. We're now going to take off the wheels. I'm going to spray WD-40 on the bleeder nut, so hopefully we can break those loose. So we're at the rear passenger wheel, and it was directly under here where I saw some leaking and where the previous owner told me that there was leaking. So I traced the brake line as far as I could around this area, and I could see that this is the brake line here, comes in here, this is all dry, and then it comes around, hooks around here, and right here it looks pinched and wet, and directly underneath of it this area seems wet, and over here is dry. I wanted to make sure that the leak was in fact right here as opposed to on the other side. I already took off the drum and just slid it off after hitting it a few times with a mallet, and you can see that the brake cylinder here is dry, dirty but dry. So it's definitely, the leak is right there, and that piece needs to be replaced right. So this is the replacement part that I bought for it. I've used some brake cleaner to try to clean up the two bolts that I need to undo on either side. I've also used some WD-40 to try to loosen it. Don't know if that's recommended or not, but that's what I did. And so next is going to be to try to break that bolt there loose, right here, and then that bolt right there loose as well. And there's a clip there just to make sure to insert that back at the end. So we'll see how it goes. I've tried everything that I could think of. I've used some vibrations, I've tried lubricating, and this is stuck. So what I've decided to do is manually with this saw here, just working my way back and forth, and I've already started slowly cutting away right here so I can fit a socket on here, and maybe that'll be able to get that nut off. I'm also going to try over here removing this clip, and then that way this will slide freely, and then maybe I can get some grips on this part here, and then vice grips or a socket or something on this if I can cut that off, and maybe that'll help separate these two parts here. Alright, so after finally hand cutting, I was able to cut through the brake line on this side from this side, and off camera I then used a 10mm socket with a small extension, and I had to hammer with my ratchet the bit onto the head, and it was pretty snug, but after some ratcheting I was able to break it loose, and that's where the other end of where I cut was, right there. So I've just cut the other piece of this off right here. This is its orientation in the car, and if I rotate this slightly you can see right there, that's the culprit where this brake line was leaking. There's that hole right there. I've already tried putting a socket on this end, and what happens is the entire brake line on the other side spins in this kind of mounting bracket, this bracket here. So what I'm going to do next is remove this clip. Hopefully this will slide right out, and then get some grips onto the hose so that way I can properly remove the other coupling there. So I actually used a pair of vice grips and a pair of pliers to evenly distribute and basically slide this away from me or towards the body of the car. That's how I got this clip loose. When I set that down, this piece here now slides right out of that bracket, and we still have to remove this part here. And the way we're going to do that is with this socket, put it on the very end, and while we're ratcheting, grab onto maybe here for some leverage. Off camera I removed the old fitting that was originally stuck in here. As you can see, vice grip teeth kind of made those marks right there, which is unfortunate, but should be fine. I had a really tough time. I used WD-40 to try to loosen it, vibrations with a hammer to try to loosen it, but this little fitting would just not budge despite my best efforts with the ratchet and the vice grips. So I enlisted the help of some heat and just kind of feathered it, not keeping the heat on it, but just feathered it back and forth on the female end of this to hopefully have it expand. Did that for about a minute. Then I tried wailing on it again with the ratchet, and lo and behold, it actually started to come out. So now it's a matter of fitting in our new part right here. So I've installed the new line. As you can see, it goes around there and attaches there. So I was very careful with my fingers to not cross it and just finger tighten them on this side as well as right here on this side. I then got my wrench, 10mm, tightened them down until they felt snug, and then another little bit of a snug down beyond that just to make sure. And then there's this clip right here, just with a light hammer to put that in place to make sure that this is secured to the bracket right there. Now it's time to bleed the system. Or so I thought. I'll explain what happened in a second, but for now, I just decided to call it a day. After bleeding the system, I did some research online, and instead of doing it from passenger rear, driver rear, passenger front, driver front, it says specifically on this vehicle, because of where the ABS modulator is located, that the order for bleeding the brakes is driver front, passenger rear, driver rear. So I got to the driver rear, was bleeding this, and what I noticed was on the same component that failed on the passenger side, which is this tube right here, it connects right into the back of the drum right here, hooks around just like so, and runs right to here, and is attached to this flexible hose here and supported by this bracket. Just like the last one on the passenger side, it's well protected here by a coating up until here. And it seems like the vulnerable point is right here, because this is where it failed on the passenger side, and while I was bleeding the system with the bleeder valve right here, covered by this cap, the rusted brake line right here was flaking, and as I was bleeding the system, you could see the brake line here sweating and brake fluid was oozing out right here. So I decided to play it safe, take out this piece, order another part, similar part to the other side. This one is part number 46361-S5A. I'll show it to you after. First thing that we're going to do, save time similar to what we did last time. We know these are 18-year-old fittings, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut right here, and then also right there, and then we're going to take out this clip, use some heat right here, and then ratchet this off with a socket, and we're going to ratchet this side off with a socket too. And we can inspect this area right here. But first I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some more WD-40, try to work some lubrication into these really rusty old fittings. And just to be clear, when I do cut, I'm going to just use this hand saw that I have and cut just where I said I was going to cut. Also, because this system is full of brake fluid now, I'm going to put a pan underneath the system to catch any brake fluid that is in this line. Alright, so I just used the hand saw, cut here and back here. This is the old piece. I'm going to hammer on a socket here, try to break this loose as I did last time. There you go, that's came out just like that, and this was the end that was cut off. So I've just been able to slide this clip rearward and out. That's what it looks like. And it just sat on the end like this, and it's what held this in place. So now, if I break the rust free, I should be able to get this out. So after I took off that U-clip, I was having a real tough time getting this bracket to loosen from the female end here. And just like last time, I figured, okay, well maybe to break it free I just got to put some torsional pressure on it. I hit hammer on it to try to vibrate it loose. Wouldn't come. So I put on the 10mm bit, I wrenched on it, and this one actually came out quite easy compared to the other side. So I'm probably just going to leave this in and put that clip back in so it holds this female end in place. So there's a shot of the old one and the new replacement fitting that I'll be putting in. So I re-removed this clip because I was having a hard time putting in the new piece to thread in on this side and on that side. And so what I thought, how would they have done this at the factory? Well, this wouldn't have been rusted, and this would have been hanging loose, so they would have been easily able to thread in both pieces, then secure this into the fitting, and then latch it with the clip. Unfortunately, this was incredibly rusted. I removed the clip, hammer didn't work. What I ultimately did was I added heat to this using this little torch here, and then with a longer socket and a larger socket that would fit over top the old fitting, I used it and put it on towards the end of the female end, and then with the extension hit it with a hammer, and eventually it broke loose. So I'm just going to let it cool down a little bit. I can remove the old fitting, it's just spinning and loose in there now, and now I can hopefully easily thread in the new piece on this side and that's on the other side over here without any tension. So using brake cleaner, just that stuff over there, clean the threads. I carefully and hand free, like hand tight, tighten this screw first. I had this hose here hanging loose, and this just through the hole inside this clip. I then took the female end of this hose, slid it through the hole of the bracket, and then hand tightened this screw enough before it would start twisting this, because this needs to sit inside the bracket in a very fixed way. It's not a circular shape, it's kind of circle with a flat side on one end. I then hammered in the clip right there so it would hold in tight, and then I tightened down this fitting with a 10mm wrench and that one as well. So I think we're done finally we can now re-bleed the system one last time and hopefully no leaks. Alright, I'm now going to attempt to bleed the brake line system, and I got a 2-liter bottle of pop. I'm going to drill a hole in the lid to fit this hose through to help bleed the system. So let's get started by drilling a hole through the lid to hold it in place. So I now have a hole for the tube and a second hole for air to escape as we're bleeding the system. So now that I have the 2 rear wheels off, I'm going to start by bleeding the brake system back on the passenger side rear, the furthest from the master cylinder, then work my way forward closest to the master cylinder. There's a little rubber cap on the back. I'm going to pry it off with a standard tip screwdriver. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the box end of my 8mm ratchet onto the bleeder nut, wiggle it free, loosen it so that way it's operational when it comes time to actually bleed the system, and then put my rubber tube end onto the end of the bleeder nut when we're ready to go. Now we're going to top up the master cylinder with brake fluid in the front of the vehicle, and every time we bleed the system, making sure that the fluid level in the master cylinder never gets to empty. And the procedure that we're going to do is we're going to have one person in the car depress the brake pedal. With it held depressed, we'll loosen the bleeder nut here, wait for the fluid to start to come out, hopefully push out some air. When the fluid flow slows, we're going to tighten it back up. The person inside the car will release the brake pedal, and then we repeat that process over and over again until there's no more air coming out of the system. And again, always checking to make sure that the master cylinder reservoir for brake fluid in the front is always has fluid in it. We also are using DOT3 fluid for this 2002 Civic. Alright, so this is the brake reservoir right here. It's completely empty. Before I did anything, I cleaned it up so I could easily see where the max fill line would be. Brake fluid apparently loves to eat paint, so I'm going to do this carefully and definitely try to do my best to not get it on any painted surface. I'm going to let that kind of funnel through. I can see bubbles bubbling up as I pour the fluid in, which means we're already bleeding the system and taking some air out. Alright, so being that this is the first time I've ever done this, the procedure that I said I would do, where I apply the brakes, open up the bleeder valve, close the bleeder valve once the fluid flow stops, then release the brake, didn't work. No fluid was coming out, and I realized it was simply because the system was just completely full of air. So what I did was, with the bleeder valve open, I pumped the brakes slowly a few times until fluid started coming out, then I closed it. Then I started that procedure. So it's tight right now. I put the closed end of the 8mm wrench on. Then I put on my little rubber tube onto the end, just like so. Hold that in place. And then I say apply the brakes. Release. So just so you can see what we're doing, there's the ratchet. There's the hose right on the end of the bleeder valve. So what I'm doing is, every time fluid gets cycled through, I'm looking at the fluid as it comes out to see if there's any air bubbles. When I see no more air bubbles, I know that it's completely bled. So it's closed right now. Apply the brakes. Release. Apply the brakes. Release. We're now going to walk to the front of the car. Make sure that we still have fluid in our cylinder there. So we definitely still have fluid in there, but now is a good time to top it up. So while we're here at the front, it's still pretty full. but we might as well keep the system full so we don't suck in any air. Basically, we repeat this process until there's no more air coming out of the bleeder valve. Also, this little system that we have working with the bottles working well, you can see that we've already started to collect some old brake fluid. It's kind of gravity fed through the tube into the bottle, and it's working out well. Okay, apply the brakes.
Yep.
Release.
Yep.
Apply the brakes.
Yep.
Release.
Yep.
Apply the brakes.
Yep.
Release. Alright, I think we're good. And because these are discs in the front, the bleeder valve is in a slightly different spot. Instead of being on the back of a drum housing or whatever it's called, it's actually just on the back of the caliper right here. Before we end the video, I just wanted to go over the cost of everything. Because I had to bleed the brake system twice, I ended up buying 2 bottles of brake fluid. Taxes in cost me $30 for both bottles. Also, the passenger side and the driver's side for that question mark shaped brake line happen to be different prices, even though they were pretty much the exact same piece, just the reverse of one another. So the prices are indicated there. I also bought some brake cleaner, which I used here and also in a later video. All in for this video, I spent $85, and my running total, including what I spent in previous videos, amounts to $537. Hopefully we'll have brakes all throughout, no more sponginess, and we should be good to go.